A young widow drags a stranger from her barn, then the firelight flashes on his gold. By sundown, a banker drops foreclosure, a coop burns, and a judge's seal rides north. At a creekside cabin, she names the rule that might save them both. One truth a day. Stay, see which breaks first, winter or their walls. The wind came knifing off Powder River and rattled the Carter place like it meant to shake the nails out. Snow stacked on the roof in white slabs, the kind that slide without warning and thump the porch hard enough to jump a heart. Hannah Rose Carter set her shoulder to the kitchen door, fought it shut, and stood a moment with her palms flat on the cold wood, breathing steam. The house smelled of oak smoke and lanolin. Damp mittens hung above the stove. Her plain wedding band sat loose on her finger now, the skin there pale where sun hadn't touched since spring. She turned to the stove, lifted the lid, and stirred beans that had been keeping since morning. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. The mother's recipe book lay open beside the salt. Brown ink, neat hand, a coffee ring like a moon on the margin, bean stew. Add bacon if Providence smiles. Something thumped outside, not the roof, heavier, softer. She took the lantern and stepped into the white roar. The barn door had blown ajar. Snow curled through the gap in a silver sheet and skittered over the floorboards. A man lay tipped against the stall wall, one knee crooked as if he'd meant to stand and thought better of it. Frost webbed his collar and mustache. His coat was good wool gone stiff as bark. "Sir?" she said, lantern low. No answer, only the clench of a jaw and the small, steady tremor of a man out past the edge of cold. Hannah hooked her hands under his arms. He was bigger than he looked. Her back complained, but she didn't listen. Out here, you hauled what needed hauling. She dragged him across the yard. Snow squealed under her boots. Inside, she worked him into the chair by the stove, popped the laces loose on the boots that were more ice than leather, and set them by the hearth. She rubbed pine liquor into his purpled fingers till they stung and came back to him. Steam lifted off his coat in slow ghosts. He blinked himself up from the bottom of the river and found her face. "Much obliged, ma'am." "Get yourself to the fire, friend. Folks out here don't let a body freeze." She tucked a quilt around him, one of the old ones, the blue star chewed thin where a dog used to worry it. She fetched a mug and a spoon and brought him beans with bacon after all. Providence had smiled last week and she'd been careful with the rind. He ate like a man who remembered manners even when starving. Small bites, a nod of thanks between them. When he reached for the mug, she noticed his hands, calloused sure, but the nails kept neat. Not a drifter's hands, not quite. "Name?" she asked. He considered that like it was a coin he might spend too soon. "Isa," he said finally. Just that. She set another quilt over his shoulders and brought a pan to thaw his socks, which had turned to planks. The stove coughed and settled. Wind moaned in the stovepipe like a far train. In the corner, the pump handle gleamed with a skin of rime. She'd deal with it at first light. Her gaze slid to the recipe book, then to her ring. The band turned easily. She stopped it with her thumb. She could hear the quiet that came every night now, the kind that set in behind the last chore and spread itself thin and wide as the snowfield. It made a person say things to fill it and regret them later, or not say anything and regret that too. "Tell you what," she said, surprising herself with the sound of her own voice. "How about one truth a day, you and me? Keeps the empty quiet off us. I'll start. I can't stand the taste of cold beans, and I keep eating them anyway." A ghost of a smile tugged his mouth. "First truth," he said, voice rough from the weather. "Cold beans are a sin." "That's just—" She set the mug back in his hand. "Then you're saved for tonight." His eyes moved over the room the way men check fences, without nosing into anything, just seeing what's there. The dried mint hanging from the rafter, the 2 cups on the shelf, and no third. the chair by the door scarred where a restless man had set his boot heel too often. "Sleep," she said. "Tuck and keep." He nodded and shifted, and as he did, a small gleam winked under his coat. A gold chain, fine and heavy, slipped from a pocket and flashed in the firelight before it vanished back into the wool. Hannah's eyes narrowed the least bit. Out here, gold didn't usually ride with men who froze in barns, not unless there was more story to them than showed. She banked the fire and let the house go quiet, the wind worrying the eaves while that little blink of gold went on burning in her mind. Morning came blue and brittle. Frost webbed the inside of the panes like Indian lace. The pump in the corner had seized in the night, and the first thing Hannah heard, after the stove yawned to life, was its old iron throat groaning when she tried it. Asa was up before her, boots soft on the floorboards. He banked the fire with a measured hand, laid on splits with the grain, not cross, so they caught tidy and burned clean. He looked over at the pump, tried the handle once, listened the way a wheelwright listens to a wheel. Leather's dry. "Packing's gone," he said, not making any larger claim. He went out bareheaded to the barn, came back with a scrap of harness and a hank of flaxline from an old feed sack. He warmed the leather on the stove lid till it went supple, cut a gasket true with his pocket knife, greased the plunger with tallow, and wound the packing neat as sewing. When he set the works back, the pump sighed, then gave up water as if ashamed for having held it back. Hannah filled the kettle and tried not to stare. Men could be handy without being something else besides. Still, he moved like a man who'd done more than one thing in his life and done them well. They took coffee at the table, elbows off, as if somebody's mother watched. His coat steamed on the chairback. She'd noticed last night the cloth was good wool, the stitches fine as a shirt-maker's pride. The plain band on her finger clicked the cup when she lifted it. She curled her hand back and thought of nothing useful. Daisy, the milk cow, had a mean notion that strangers were wolves. Hannah warned him of it, but Asa just walked through the barn slow, set his palm flat to Daisy's neck, found that one place under the ear all cows favor, and gentled her like he knew her name in some older language. Milk came steady after that. He hummed a tune without words. It set the barn right. By noon, the wind had dropped, and Maud Crowley rattled up with a pan under a towel. She came in as if the house were hers, which, in a pinch, it might be. Maud had midwifed most of the county and turned more than one man out by the ear. "I fetched cornbread," she said, eyes making the rounds, which is to say, taking inventory. "A widow keepin' a boarder through a blow. Tongues'll wag. Tongues are like shutters in March. Don't take much wind." "Afternoon, ma'am," Asa said, standing because some men still knew how. Maud looked him up and down without heat. "You tip your hat right." "That's a start." She cut the bread, ruthless, and left half the pan anyway. Virgil Crowley dropped from the wagon to check a cinch and drifted to the door, hat brim low, one eye on Asa's hands the whole time. "You ain't green," Virgil said. It was not a compliment and not one. "Just cold," Asa answered. They left with more talk out in the yard than in, the way good neighbors do. Hannah watched the wagon go and felt grateful for noise that wasn't the wind. Toward afternoon, Asa took a look at the chicken yard. Something had been sniffing nights. He walked the fence once, knelt to the snow, and pointed with 2 fingers the distance of a wolf's stride. He boiled a kettle, scalded old feathers, rubbed scent onto a bit of fluff, and set 2 snares in that quiet way men set clocks. No brag in it, no schooling either, just textbook clean. Ephraim Nash from the store came by late with coffee sacks and a paper of needles. He saw Asa raised one brow like he'd just watched a calf rope itself. "Beans and coffee," he told Hannah, sliding the bundle over. "Pay when the calves do. I'll pin it to my goodwill and see if it holds "It will," Hannah said. Dusk drew down fast, the kind that lands all at once like a blanket thrown. She and Asa ate by the fire, potatoes crisped on the stove plate, a heel of cornbread Maud hadn't trusted them with, and coffee strong enough to bite. When the chores were stowed and the house had that empty feel it got every night, Hannah remembered the bargain she'd made with herself more than him. "We owe a truth, Mr. Asa." He wiped a hand on his trouser leg, looked faintly amused and a shade wary. "All right." He thought a moment. "I hate parlors polished slick. Can't keep my feet under me in rooms like that, and the talk slides just the same." Hannah surprised a laugh out of herself. It came up rusty and warm. "Good thing," she said. "We ain't got one." He nodded, and the quiet after was easier. Before banking the stove, she stepped out to snap the coop latch. The snow had kept their secrets all day and now told them back. A ring of wolf prints sulled the yard. Big pads, claws sharp to the edge of the coop shadow, then gone. The snares stood where he'd set them, neat in their places. She crouched, palm hovering above one print, as if feeling heat off a stove. There wasn't any, of course, only the cold reading of a hunter that knew how to test boards and patience both. Behind her, the house ticked and settled. Inside, a man she didn't know slept under a quilt that had seen better years. Hannah straightened, set the latch twice, and walked back through the crunch, the sound of it small and loud at once. The prints stayed where they were, circling, telling their little truth in the snow. They came just before noon, 3 riders with their collars up and their eyes down, wind-cutting pennants out of their breath. Hannah saw them top the rise and felt the day go tight. She pulled the kettle from the boil and wiped her hands on her apron, the way a person does when there isn't a thing in the world to clean. The lead man swung down easy, like he believed the ground belonged to him. Abner Pike, hat brim cocked, right ear puckered white from an old freeze, the kind a man keeps for a lesson. Behind him slid Red Larkin, lantern-jawed and sunburnt even in winter, and Bode Miles, heavy through the shoulders with a stare that said he'd done collection work on darker porches than this. "Mrs. Carter," Pike said, as if calling the roll. "Weather's broke enough for business." Hannah let the screen door whisper shut between them. "Mind your boots," she said, and stepped aside. They stamped in, tracking grit on her knotty pine floor. Asa moved from the stove without hurry and took up position by the end of the pine table, hands quiet at his sides, eyes steady. He didn't crowd them, didn't shrink either. Pike laid a long envelope on the table as carefully as a doctor sets a saw. "Notice of foreclosure, principal $310 plus interest and fees accruing. 2 weeks to cure or vacate." He tapped the paper with a gloved finger. "There is, however, a merciful path. Our investors will take the place clean for $380. Leaves you enough to ride east and be done with winters and worries." "Investors," Isa said, the word flat as a plank. "Eastern money," Pike allowed, smiling with only half his mouth. "Men who understand opportunity. Railroad taught me one thing, Mr. Asa will do." "Mr. Asa, it taught me the man who moves first gets to keep his hat." Hannah slid the paper closer, not because she meant to sign, but because she wanted to know the shape of the weapon pointed at her. The ink sat fat on the page. Someone had written her name too neat, like they'd practiced the letters for a living. "I've paid what I could," she said. "I'll pay more when calves drop." Pike's smile fell off like frost in sunshine. Winter don't take scrip in promises. His gaze drifted, casual as a cat, over the stove, the neat shelf, the single cup's place where a second used to sit. It came to rest on a sigh. "And who might you be to stand in a widow's kitchen like you had say?" "He's a man I pulled out of a storm," Hannah said. "That's say enough." Pike pivoted to her again, eyes small. "Widow kindness is a holy thing, ma'am. Bank policy is secular." Red Larkin let a knuckle graze the hammers of his shotgun for punctuation. Bode Miles found a wall to lean on that creaked under him once and then thought better of it. The door eased open behind them, a thumb's width, then a hand's. Virgil Crowley stepped in without ceremony, hat still on, snow beating the brim. He didn't look at anyone long enough to wake trouble, just took up the jam as if it was where he always meant to stand. His right hand hung near, not on, the butt of his Colt. Men like Virgil didn't scratch itches quick. "Afternoon," Virgil said to the air. Pike's mouth ticked. "I see the territory has an audience." "House is small," Virgil said. "Sound carries." Pike snapped the envelope open, slid the notice out, and palmed a fountain pen. The nib winked mean. "Initial here that you received. No shame in taking the 380, ma'am. This dirt's a hard friend to a woman alone." Asa's voice came soft and square-edged. "She ain't alone." He didn't look at Hannah when he said it, which somehow made it heavier. Pike turned to him, head canted, like a crow hearing a watch tick. "That's so." His gaze dropped to Asa's coat as if drawn by a magnet. The edge had shifted just enough with the move from the stove that a gold chain showed a finger's length, not fancy, solid. Pike's eyes sharpened the way a knife does on leather. He didn't reach. He didn't need to. He'd smelled money 3 miles out, and now he'd seen the shine. "Mr. Asa," Pike said, voice gone gentle with danger, "some men are pocketbooks that learn to walk. Some are wind. Which kind are you?" Asa didn't blink. "Just cold," he said, same as he'd told Virgil yesterday. "And looking to stay that way a while longer." Pike made a show of regret, like a gambler sighing over a card he means to play anyway. 2 weeks, he said to Hannah, tapping the date. "Then the bank and its Eastern friends claim what paper and prudence say is theirs. You can sign easy or freeze hard. Choice belongs to you." He pinched the brim of his hat and turned, and his men turned with him, a little flock of winter crows lifting off her floor and out into the white. Virgil didn't move till they were specks on the hill. Then he slid the door shut with 2 fingers and looked at Hannah, not at the paper. "I'll be back toward evening," he said. "Wind'll skate up. Keep your lantern trimmed." "Obliged," Hannah said, and only then did she let herself sit. The kitchen went quiet in that way a room does after bad company. Same chairs, same stove, but everything set an inch off what it was. Asa poured coffee and set it where her hand could find it without looking. "They'll come early," he said. "Men like that don't know how to wait proper." Hannah stared at the pine table, at the nick in the edge where her husband had slammed a jar too hard last spring, laughing when it broke. She could not find the laugh now, after the chores, after the afternoon wore itself down to ash, after Virgil came by once more and left a sack of oats, like it could stand guard. The house settled toward night. The pump breathed right. The kettle talked to itself. Snow hissed on the stovepipe and went quiet. Hannah remembered the bargain she'd made. "We owe a truth," she said, voice low so it wouldn't shake. "I'll go first. I fear the long nights. It's not the dark so much as the hours. All that time for a mind to pick old bones." Asa's eyes held hers steady. "My turn," he said. He didn't dress it up. "I fear being seen as a pocketbook. I've been that, and it rubs a man down to metal." She nodded, feeling the words like heat through a glove. Outside, the wind fussed with the eaves. On the table, Pike's paper lay white as a drift. Hannah set the coffee down and touched the edge of it with one finger, the way you test ice before you step. The chain under Asa's coat, she had seen it, same as Pike. The difference was she didn't know yet whether it was weight or anchor. The lamp popped once and steadied. They sat with their truths between them like a small, decent fire. And in the quiet, the 2-week clock started, ticking in the room, though there wasn't a clock to be seen. He was gone at graylight. Hannah woke to stove coal and a folded square on the pine table, his hand neat as fence pickets. Riding to town, back before dark. Nothing else. No why. The day held its breath and didn't give it back. She mended a tear in the ticking. She salted the last ham bone. She skimmed cream till the crock wore a white lid. Every chore felt like counting, 1, 2, 3, while some other clock ticked where she couldn't see it. By noon she hitched up to the store for kerosene and needles. Ephraim Nash was sweeping his stoop, broom whisking the snow thin. He glanced once over her shoulder like a man measuring a shadow. "You hear?" he said, light as sugar. "Had a fella in this morning asking me prices on every patch from the buttes to the creek. Talked square and quick, like a broker with a train to catch." Her mouth went dry. "What fella?" "Tall hat, coat cut fine, polite enough to make a preacher blink." Ephraim leaned on the broom. "Paid in gold. Didn't squint at the change." She set the kerosene on the counter, so careful it barely made a sound. "You sell him anything besides talk?" "Only coffee," he said. Looked like he needed it more than I did. The road home was 2 miles longer than it had ever been. She drove it with her jaw set, lantern rattling on the footboard, the plain band on her finger cold as coin. Dusk was already gathering when hooves crunched in the yard. She didn't open the door. Let him come to it. Let him knock. He did, gentle as if the wood were tender. "Asa," she said, when he stepped inside, and the name came out like it tasted wrong. He took off his hat and held it by the brim. Snow dusted his shoulders. His eyes moved once to the stove, once to her hands, and then stayed put. "Evening, ma'am." "You went to Ephraim's," she said, not a question. "I did. You asked him the price on every acre in the valley." Her voice stayed calm. It surprised them both. He drew a breath and set the hat on the chair back, careful. A length of the gold chain slid free, bright in the lamplight, then stilled against his vest. "I asked, what are you?" Strange how a body forgets grammar when the hinge breaks. "Who?" He let the silence stand long enough that she could hear the wick ticking. Then he squared himself like a man about to take a load. "My given name is Asa Whitmore," he said. "I run stock from here to the breaks. Some folks call that an outfit. Some call it a sin. I came here to be just Asa a while." The room changed size without moving. She could smell lanolin and oak smoke and the bitter edge of coffee gone cold. She lifted the mother's recipe book and set it down again because her hand needed to set something down. "You slept under my roof," she said, "ate from my mother's pages and watched me count pennies like a fool, while you walked around with a watch. Chain heavy enough to buy this table. I didn't come to laugh at your counting." "No," she said, soft and sharp. "You came to hide." He flinched and didn't deny it. "I was tired of men talking to the money first, and the man not at all. I thought if I left the name outside I could hear my own feet on the floor again. And so you put your boot prints on mine." The wind hummed in the pipe. The pump clicked as its leather settled. He took a half step that put the smell of horse and cold air between them. "I meant to tell you." "When?" "After I signed a deed to save my home and found your name already on the valley." She shook her head once. "We made a bargain, you and me, 1 truth a day. You paid with small change and kept the banknotes folded." He swallowed and looked like a man who'd lost the shape of a trail. "I told you I hated parlors. I should have told you I owned half of 'em." She laughed, and it wasn't kind. "You should have told me who walked into my house." The chair scraped. She stood, palms on the pine table, and felt the groove where her husband had nicked it with a jar last spring. "I don't know what kind of game rich men play to feel poor. I only know what kind of winter a poor woman lives when men like Pike come to the door. It isn't a game. It is to me, if I'm the board." He reached then, not for her, but for the words. "Let me fix what Pike's." She lifted a hand and he stopped. "You don't get to fix me like a pump leather. Not tonight. Maybe not ever." His face went still in the old way hard men get still. After a breath, "What do you want me to do?" "Take your hat. Take your Whitmore. Take that chain back where it belongs." The next words came quiet and level, the way you tell a green horse what is and isn't allowed. "Get out of my house." He stood like he'd earned it, which he had, then nodded once, which was the only thing left worth doing. He set the hat on his head and buttoned his coat, one slow button at a time, as if each hole might argue. At the door he paused, hand on the latch. "One truth," he said, and his voice had gravel where it didn't before. "I didn't know how to be a man worth your supper with my name on me. I see now that hiding it makes me worth less." She didn't answer. The latch clicked. Cold rolled in, then the door took it back. The house was too big after. The lamp showed her the shapes of her life. Crock, chair, broom, ledger. She put the foreclosure paper under a saucer to keep it from sliding in the draft, then fetched the ledger and the tin where she kept receipts folded small. She set out a sheet of foolscap and a pencil worn to a stub, and wrote dates, payments, witness names, Maud Crowley, Virgil Crowley, and what they'd seen and heard. She tied the packet with twine and slid it into a flour sack. County would get its share of this before Pike did. She banked the stove and watched the coals sink to red islands in a black sea. The plain band spun once on her finger, and she pinned it with her thumb till the spin died. When she blew the lamp, the dark came in a soft wave. The house made its settling noises. Somewhere far off, a coyote called and didn't wait for an answer. The quiet lay down heavy, and for the first time since the storm, she let it. Outside, the snow took her tracks and smoothed them flat. Inside, the room held the shape of a man who wasn't there, and the shape of a woman who would not be moved by gold. Sunday came pale and brittle, a sky the color of tin. Hannah skimmed the cream and set the crock on the sill where cold kept house better than any cellar. She laid her daddy's Springfield on the pine table, oiled and quiet, not for show, only so a man with dull intentions might find a sharper thought. They heard the riders before they saw them. Abner Pike again, early as frost, with Red Larkin and Bode Miles and one more hat she didn't know. Pike stepped down light, winter squeaking under his heels. He didn't bother the door this time. He called from the yard like a rooster that owned the sun. "Miss Carter," he sang, "the calendar runs faster when money's in question. I've brought a kinder figure, 400, even if you sign today." Hannah came to the porch and shut the door behind her. Steam blew from the stock's nostrils. Sweat darkened saddles where it shouldn't in a cold like this. Someone had been pushing. "Deadline's 2 weeks," she said. Pike smiled his half-smile. "Deadlines are like fences. You can move 'em if you know where the posts rot." He tipped his chin toward the cabin roof. "Awful isolated out here for a woman alone. Stoves tip, chimneys spark. Accidents happen in winter." Hannah didn't glance back at the chimney. "Not to careful people." Red Larkin aimed his grin just off her left shoulder, where fear might have stood if she'd invited it. "Careful folk die same as bold ones, only cleaner." "Morning, Pike!" The voice came from the road. Deputy Tully Briggs sat his bay halfway up the rise, badge dull, coat buttoned wrong, a man in no hurry who somehow got everywhere on time. He rode closer in that mild way that lets a hand ease off a gun without noticing. "You and your friends look lost. Church is that way." He thumped it toward the cottonwoods. Pike tipped his hat. "Deputy, plenty of eyes in this flat," Tully said, glancing at the roofline, the woodpile, the Springfield on the table, showing through the window. "Shame to stumble where folks can testify about it." Silence held a beat. Pike's smile soured. "Offer stands till sundown," he said, and gathered his reins. "After that the bank moves as it must." He wheeled and trotted off, his trio stringing behind, the fourth hat with them like a shadow that hadn't decided who to follow. Hannah stood on the porch and let the cold bite her cheeks till the heat left. In town, the Reverend Josiah Bell took his text from the prophets and turned it plain. "Do no wrong to the widow," he read, and then he said it again without the Bible's cushion. Word travels. By afternoon, men were nodding to Hannah when they weren't looking, and women were leaving things on her step they claimed they'd brought by mistake. Toward evening, the air picked up a bad smoke, green wood somewhere, or tar pitch, or just her mind telling her every smell had teeth. She walked the yard slow, checked the yard light, the coop latch, the stack of kindling set too close to the stove wood, and moved it back. Her hands came away scented with sap and mutton fat from the rag she'd used on the rifle. She set the Springfield back on the table and left the door unlatched to say what needed saying. Dusk put blue on everything. Hoofbeats again, but a single horse this time, not a flock. She knew the rhythm before she told herself she didn't. He stopped short of the porch and stood on the ground to make himself smaller, hat in his hands. Asa looked older by a week than yesterday would allow. "Deputy rode by," he said. "I figured he'd done the warning, but I'd do the standing." "Stand where you like," she said, and it came out kinder than she'd planned. The truth she owed him waited in her mouth till it found its legs. "I haven't forgiven you." He nodded once, as if the blow were a weight he'd been meaning to pick up. "I've earned that." He didn't step up. He didn't ask. Inside. "Another truth?" he said, voice low. "I won't let Pike make a story out of you. That your money talking or your mouth?" "My work," he said, "and my name this time." The wind skimmed the yard and set the porch rope to ticking. Hannah's hand rested on the door jamb where the paint had worn to smooth. She didn't move, and he didn't either. They held the distance between them like a rope bridge in a blow. Somewhere down the draw, a grouse popped up and went down again. The quiet stretched. Then it broke. At first it was a tremor underfoot, small as a heartbeat. Then the ground began to drum. Dogs in the distance let go their voices. Over the ridge came the thunder of many hooves, a low rolling like far thunder that wasn't far at all. The line crested the rise in order. Whitmore riders fanned, wide slickers snapping, mounts blowing fog. A man in a long coat rode with a satchel lashed behind him and a map case under his arm. Hannah's breath went shallow. Asa didn't look back. He watched her face. The first of his men topped the ridge, and behind them the next, and then the next, the whole line laying itself down like a fence someone meant to set straight across her yard. They fanned across the yard and came down easy, not in a rush, just sure. Saddles creaked, breath steamed. A man in a town coat swung down with a map case and a carpet bag that had seen less dust than most. He tipped his hat to Hannah like a clerk to a queen. "Horace Ellery, counselor at law," he said, voice Eastern but sanded some by miles. "Mr. Whitmore asked me to put papers where talk's been." Asa dismounted last. He didn't come on to the porch. He stood where the mud had frozen hard and took off his gloves, one finger at a time. "No parlors, no polish," he said, meeting Hannah's eye. "Just what's due." Ellery set his case on the pine table and unrolled a survey plat wide enough to shade a calf. Black lines, neat as knitting, diced the valley. He tapped with a fountain pen that wrote like it enjoyed itself. "This section, Powder River benchland, 160 acres, adjoins Whitmore Range on 3 sides. Here," he slid out a second stack, letters and bills of sale, "are correspondences showing Abner Pike conducting purchases through a Shelkentron, Bison, and Bell Holdings at prices materially below fair value. Pattern of coercion, time notes, winter ultimatums. I expect a judge to use words like bad faith." Virgil whistled under his breath. That there's more lines than a dry creek in August. Ellery smiled with the corner of his mouth. Maps talk, Mr. Crowley, sometimes louder than men. He set out another paper, thick rag bond that felt like weight in the hand. Deed of conveyance, he said. Mr. Whitmore tenders title to the 160 known as the Carter Place, together with a repair fund held in trust to set right fences, pump, roof, mark well the clause, equity, not charity. No strings, no mortgage, no lien, a fair thing made lawful. Hannah read the first line twice without seeing the words. The room had that hollow to it you get before a storm. She could smell horse and paper and the sour edge of snow thawing off coats. Asa stood still as a post, hat down. His men watched the horizon and not her door. Good men, trained men, hands easy, eyes counting angles the way a shepherd counts ears. Why? Hannah said at last, and her voice didn't crack so much as settle. Why give it? Because it's hers, Asa said, in ways that don't fit on a map. Ellery cleared his throat gently. Also because it douses Pike's match. He cannot foreclose what she already owns. As if summoned by the name, two riders turned in at the gate. Pike with a skinny clerk in a scarf too clean for weather. Pike swung down with his papers held like a Bible. Hold, he called. The county has entered a writ of delay on any transfer pending review of a... He peered at his own page, savoring it. Historic boundary dispute. Ellery didn't blink. Filed when? This morning. And by whom? Pike's smile showed a rabbit's luck. By counsel for Bison and Bell, innocent investors seeking clarity. Clarity, Ellery repeated, tasting the word. Judge put a time on it? 10 days, Ratpus said, cheerful now as a jay. Plenty of nights for reflection. Ellery folded his hands like a preacher resigning a soul to Providence while he loaded both barrels for prayer. So be it. We'll meet it. In the meantime, counselor, mind your men. His glance slid to Red Larkin and stuck. Pike tipped his hat in a shape that wasn't respect and rode out with his paper held high so the wind could read it. The riders drifted back toward the ridge with Asa's nod. Ellery repacked careful. I talk fast, he told Hannah, but the law walks. We'll keep it from wandering. Asa stayed. He didn't press a pen into her hand. He didn't come closer than the step. When the writ lifts, he said, the deed's yours if you want it. Dusk took the color out of things. Virgil rode off to sit a watch on the road. Deputy Tully ghosted the draw like a man the dark knew by name. Hannah set coffee on the back of the stove and tried to tell whether her heart beat from hope or from the way the day had run her. Night came down clean. It didn't stay. The first lick of smoke was wrong. Not oak, not kitchen. Tar. It reached under the door like a thief's hand. Hannah was moving before the smell finished its thought. She flung the door and the cold knocked her back a step. Out there, behind the coop, a low orange crawled and bit, lighting hens into jagged shadows. She grabbed the yard bell rope and yanked till it balled the flat awake. Fire! She ran, skirts hiked, boots sawing into the crust. The Springfield leaned by the door. She left it, took the bucket instead. The coop's far corner flamed where kindling never was. That meant a man had brought it. A shape broke from the shadow, the long jaw, the hat brim cut sharp. Red Larkin. He juked left, thinking to slide the dark like a trout, and met Deputy Tully coming the other way, easy as a fence post just happened to grow there. Tully's shoulder took him mid-ribs and planted him in snow with a sound like a sack of feed, deciding on a permanent address. Thought you might get lost, Tully said, and rolled him with his boot heel to cuff him neat. Larkin spat cinders and worse words, But he came up roped and stayed that way. Virgil and Asa were already on the buckets, passing and throwing, until the orange slid back into black snot smoke and then into stink and hiss and wet, the way a bad thing dies. Hannah leaned hands to knees, lungs burning a clean hurt. Frost smoked off her hair. Asa straightened next to her, steam lifting off his coat like a ghost leaving. He pointed with his chin at the scorched corner. He meant it to run. I know. Tully came up with Red Larkin in tow. Wrists trussed, eyes mean. We'll take this one to the judge tonight, he said. Might be the writ falls apart the same hour his story does. Ellery appeared, hatless, hair gone wild in the steam. Arson during a pending civil matter, he said, almost pleased to have a word for it. Judges love a simple choice. They stood in the black spark quiet a while, listening to the coop drip like a thaw. Hens muttered, offended but alive. The stars weren't much. Cloud lay low. Inside, the house smelled of smoke and wet wool, and coffee gone too long. Hannah set the bucket down and lifted the deed Ellery had left, its paper cool and stubborn. Her plain band clicked the edge. Asa watched her read without speaking. We still owe our truth, she said, voice scraped clean by the night. Here's mine. I couldn't sign in daylight, and I can't sign in smoke. He nodded, not disappointed, only marked by it. Mine, he said. I want this fixed so bad I could throw money at it till it drowns. That's my crooked habit. I'm fighting it. She set the deed down flat. It lay there like a block of ice cut square from the river, hard and shining, not ready to melt just because a person wished it would. Outside, hoofs faded. Inside, the lamp held. A small sun that didn't ask much. The night went on, and the 10 days stretched in front of them, long, white, and honest as winter. The road to Buffalo went white and hard, a narrow vein hammered flat by freighters and wind. Before sunup, Hannah fed Daisy, banked the stove, and wrote a note for Maud. If I'm late, milk the evening and scold the hens for me. She buttoned her best wool, slid the packet of receipts and statements into her bodice, and settled the bay with the quiet ears. The leather bit was a bar of ice in her palm. She warmed it with her breath and told the horse a small lie. It's only a short ride, she said. It wasn't. Snow squeaked the way it does when it's colder than men care to measure. Breath went silver out of the horse and came back in ropes. Cottonwoods along the creek stood black as ribs. The world was pared down to 3 sounds: hoof, leather, Hannah's own breath pacing itself, like a prayer you say without thinking. Halfway to the river grade, she passed Deputy Tully Briggs, leading Red Larkin roped to his saddle like an ugly dog that had learned a new trick. Red's jaw was set for spitting, but the cold had taken the water out of him. Tully tipped 2 fingers off his hat. Keep your seat, Mrs. Carter. I'll escort this piece of kindling to the judge. If Providence is looking, the writ will burn where he meant your coop to. Hannah nodded once and rode on. Buffalo had smoke you could see and trouble you could smell. She tied to the rail outside the courthouse, a limestone box with a stovepipe like a cannon. Inside it was all coal heat and ink and a clerk's pen scratching for its supper. Men wore sleeve garters and faces like last week's bread. A map of the county hung crooked. The only thing in town that admitted it leaned. Business, the clerk said, without looking up. Complaint, Hannah said. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. She set her packet down, ledger pages in a hand. The Reverend Bell called tidy, and the world called poor. Ephraim Nash's affidavit that Abner Pike priced grief as if it were corn. Maud Crowley's statement that men called at odd hours with threats shaped like advice. Virgil's note in 4 words. Saw it. Will swear, the clerk read faster than she would have guessed. You've brought your neighbors with you, he said, like he hadn't seen that trick in a while. I brought the truth, she said. Sometimes it needs more than one signature. He slid the packet into a file and wrapped it straight against the desk as if that made it bigger. Judge is in chambers. He's partial to coffee and quiet. You got one. I'll fetch the other. While he went, Hannah stood under the map and traced with her eyes the slit of Powder River, the scribble of draws, the notion that ink could tell a country what it was. She felt the weight of her plain band, like a coin she was keeping against a day when the price changed. Voices ran down the hall, Tully's slow iron drawl, the clerk's quick scratch, a third voice with Pike's vinegar in it. Doors thumped. A hinge complained. Someone said arson, and someone said pending civil matter, and then the word fraud landed like a shoe. The door opened, and there was Judge Harlan, lids heavy, gut like a pot-belly stove, hands clean. He read the top page of Hannah's packet, then the bottom, which told her more than if he'd read the middle. He glanced once into Red Larkin's face and found a nothing he cared to keep. "Counselor Briggs," the judge said to Tully, out of habit, which made Tully's mouth twitch. "This writ that delayed transfer, who filed it?" "Firm callin' itself Bison and Bell," Tully said. "Their letterhead smells of Pike." Judge Harlan grunted, a sound like a man setting a log where he wants it. He took up his pen, wrote 3 lines that looked like fence, straight and meant, and handed the paper to the clerk. "Void the writ for bad faith. Set Pike to answer on filing fraud. Book Larkin on arson with aggravation." Pike wasn't there to hear it. He had men for that. The clerk snapped a copy and sanded it dry. "You'll want a seal," he said, and pressed the brass till it bit. The sound was a small mercy. Tully thumbed his hat back to the angle he favored when life suited him. "Obliged, Judge. We'll get it to where it wants to go." Hannah signed where the clerk told her to, the way you signed to say you were, in fact, standing in the life that picked you. She thanked them without flowers on it and went back into the cold, which felt honest after rooms full of paper. The ride home cut different. Snow hissed where the sun had put a thin skin on top. The bay took the grade steady, sky opened enough to show a seam of blue. On the far strait, where the wind always threw a drift, and men always forgot it, she cut wide and let her eyes stray toward the place where Asa's riders had topped the hill. It was empty now, and less frightening for being so. Back at the house, the kitchen looked broken in and friendly as a good boot. She hung her coat on the peg by the door, and the weight nearly pulled the peg out. Something in the lining caught and scritched, like paper against wool. She eased the inner seam with 2 fingers and drew out a torn journal page, folded twice and softened by Carrie, not a ledger leaf. Isa's hand, cleaner, with more sky between the words. "I have made a name that won't let me swallow my own spit. Men call it first, and then they call me, if they have time left. I keep wondering what a day would feel like if somebody said, and meant my shoulders, not my brand. I am tired of being useful and unknown in the same breath." There was more, a line about mud and gold and how both stuck. A line about wanting to be good at small things that didn't show, chopping kindling to the right length, mending leather so it didn't squeak, listening without looking at the clock. The last line cut off mid-sentence, as if the thought had found a wall. Hannah sat with it and let the house be quiet. The stove ticked. The pump sighed. Outside, a crow complained at nothing in particular. She reached for paper and wrote a letter she did not intend to send, her hand slower than Asa's, and more stubborn. "One truth," she wrote, "because that was the bargain. I want to trust, and it scares me. I have learned most things the hard way. I don't know how to learn this another way." She folded the letter and slid it under the mother's recipe book, where other women's words had kept better women than her, alive through winters worse than this. Dusk came on like wool. Hoofbeats sounded in the dooryard. One horse, confident, then two more, lighter, with a rattle like a case latch. She opened the door before the knock and found Horace Ellery on the step, hair frozen into commas, spectacles fogged, a grin fighting for a place on his face. "Mrs. Carter," he said, holding up a packet sealed in red wax, bright as a new wound. "Compliments of Judge Harlan and a day that finally made sense. The seal is cleared. Your road is straight." He tapped the wax with one finger. It was still warm. She left before noon with the seal-cleared packet in her satchel, and the unsent letter under the recipe book told Maud where the milk pail lived, and followed the creekish until it began to speak under its own ice. Cottonwoods stood bare as broomsticks, a thin blue smoke stitched up from a notch of timber where the bank bent. If a man wanted to be only himself, he'd pick a place like that. A cowhand at the Whitmore gate had said, hat tug polite, "Cabin by the bend, ma'am. He's been watching the trail like Sunday." She tied off at a deadfall and walked the last stretch, boots wringing the crust, breath making small clouds that startled nothing. Isa opened the door before she knocked, as if the hinges told him her name. He'd shed the town coat, flannel shirt, sleeves pushed, hair damp from melt. The room behind him was plain, a peg, a cot, a stump for a chair, a shelf with 3 books and a tin of coffee that looked ashamed of itself. Ash banked deep in a stone hearth. The place smelled of wood smoke and wool, and iron warmed slow. "Hannah," he said, "just that, like a man setting a single nail true." "Afternoon," she answered and stepped in. The creek talked through the walls in a winter whisper. A kettle muttered where it thought she couldn't hear. They didn't reach for each other. They didn't reach for words right away either. Asa poured coffee and missed the measure. It came out the color of weak tea and tasted worse. She sipped, winced, and set the cup down with mercy. "Second truth," she said, letting it find a grin at one corner. "Your coffee's awful." "First truth," he answered, accepting the blow with a nod. "I brewed it so thin I could read through it." "Didn't mean to." She set her satchel by the hearth and laid the seal packet on the stump between them. The wax caught light like a small red eye. Judge lifted the writ. "Deputy's got red booked and Pike headed for a bench he won't enjoy. Paper walks our way now." He let out the kind of breath a man doesn't know he's been holding. Then he put both palms flat on his knees, the way you do when there's one thing you owe before any other. "I have a truth that's bigger than papers," he said. "It should have been first." She waited. "I had a woman once," he said. "Margaret Ashford. Back east. Good family, good shoes, better talk. I showed her the parts of me with polish on 'em and hid the mud, the blood, the bawling calves, the smell of wet leather and tired horses. She liked the gentleman I painted, not the hand I was." He scratched his knuckles with his thumb, a nervous habit she hadn't seen on him before. When she came west and met the mud, she left. I told myself I'd been honest enough. I hadn't. He looked up and made himself hold her eye. Then I met you and did the opposite. I hid the gold, the name, the watch, the reach, because I was afraid you'd see just that, and not the man who eats beans by the stove and listens when a woman talks about a pump leather and a husband gone. Fear both times, just pointed different. The kettle clicked itself dumb and cooled. Outside, ice ticked off the eaves like someone counting nickels. Hannah stood very still and let the words settle where they wanted. She could feel the old ache rise and try to talk first. She set a hand on the stump to keep it down. "Here's mine," she said. She reached into her coat and drew out a small silver ring Ephraim had hammered to size, plain as a Sunday plate. She set it on the stump. It looked shy between them. "I ain't asking money. I'm asking truth every day, not the big kind only, the small ones too. I'm worried about feed." I broke the latch. "Coffee's no good. One truth a day so we don't lose each other in weather." His face changed in a way that had nothing to do with light. Less guarded, more human. "Yes, ma'am," he said, and it landed like a vow. "One truth a day. I can work that kind of fence." "Work it," she said. "Don't post it and forget it." He reached, slow so the gesture didn't spook, and put his fingers to the ring without taking it up. "You want me to wear this?" he asked. "Or is it a promise we both hold?" "It's a rule we live by," she said. "Wear it if it helps you remember." He slid it to his own finger, the right hand, the one he used on ropes and reins, and it sat there like it had been waiting. They went quiet again, not the hard quiet from the kitchen after he left, but the useful kind that lets a room settle around two people without pushing them together. He poured more coffee and managed to make it worse. They both noticed, and neither said so. The creek talked on. A branch popped in the hearth and sent up a little flight of sparks that died mid-air like fireflies forgetting themselves. Asa looked at the seal packet and then back to her. "You want to sign here?" "No," she said. "I want to sign at the Apple Stake, where my man set it the spring before fever took him. That ground remembers both names. The deed ought to, too. Mourning, with Virgil to witness, and the Reverend to say one short thing he means." He nodded as if the idea had been his, and he'd been waiting for her to catch it. "We'll take coffee that's fit for humans," he said, trying a smile. "I'll practice between now and then." "I've tasted your practice," she said, and it put warmth in the room that didn't come from fire. He sobered, thumb worrying the edge of his new ring. "One more truth before you go." He looked at the floorboards and then at her. "When Pike came with that writ, I wanted to drown the problem in money the way I always have. It's my worst habit and my easiest one. I'm learning a different use for what I own, to level, not to lord." She weighed that. "Keep saying it. Then keep doing it." "Yes, ma'am." She rose. He did not reach for her. She did not offer a hand. They let the distance be what it needed for one more night. At the door she paused and touched the jamb, where a man had planed it smooth a long time ago. "Truth for today," she said, glancing back. "I'm still scared." "Truth for today," he returned, voice plain. "So am I." She stepped into the cold, and it met her like a familiar. The ice ticking had quickened. The roof shrugged a thin slide of snow that hissed itself quiet at her boots. Winter was loosening. Not gone. She saddled the bay and swung up, felt the leather accept her the way good work does. When she turned for the trail, Asa stood in the doorway with his hand around the ring, like a man learning a new prayer. The cabin threw a stripe of warm out across the white and then pulled it back, and she rode home with the sound of the creek in her ears and a rule in her pocket that felt like something strong enough to cross a season. Morning came clean as a bone. The cold had a shine to it. Hannah pulled on her best wool and tucked the seal-cleared papers under her arm. Asa met her by the gate with 2 mugs that were finally coffee and not rinse water. He'd shaved. It made him look less like a legend and more like a man headed to work. They walked out to the little rise where the apple stake stood, just a stick of cottonwood her first husband had pounded in with a mallet. Bark long gone, top worn round by wind. Virgil Crowley waited there already, gloves off, breath smoking. Reverend Josiah Bell came up slow with his book in his pocket, instead of his hand, a sign he meant to keep it short and true. "No frills," Hannah said. "No frills," the Reverend answered. He touched the stake like it were an altar built out of fence wood. "A word, and we're done. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly. That'll do for land, same as for marriage." Virgil took the papers, found the place with his thumb. "Print here, sign there, I'll witness you solid." He fished a pencil from his hatband and spit on the tip like that might make the laid worth more. Hannah set her name in a hand that had learned to be careful without being small. Hannah Rose Carter. The pencil bit the paper a little where her breath caught, then steadied. Asa signed not over her, not under, but alongside. Asa Whitmore, the letters plain, the flourish saved for the work. Virgil put his name down after, a four-stroke brand of a man who didn't like fuss. The Reverend wrote bell the way a bell sounds. Firm, one note, no echo. For a moment nobody spoke. Wind stirred the cheatgrass under the crust. Far off a cow bawled like it had remembered something. Asa took his pocket watch out, thumbed it once, then walked back to the house and set it in the kitchen drawer where women keep twine and string, power put away with useful things. He closed the drawer soft. Deputy Tully Briggs rode in as they were sharing the last of the decent coffee. He had a paper folded tight and a look that could pass for satisfaction if you knew him. Behind him, Bode Miles came unwilling, hat in his hands for once, mouth set like a nailed board. "Judge says fraud," Tully told them. "Says Pike gets to explain himself to a room with a flag in it. Bode here had a wind change of conscience, named the Eastern Syndicate, paying him to squeeze widows and drunk men. Names go on paper this afternoon." Bode stared at his hat brim. "Didn't figure it'd go this far," he muttered. "It always goes this far," Tully said. "Not mean, just finished." He tipped 2 fingers to Hannah. "You'll want to come sign a line or 2 later. For now, enjoy your morning." They did in the prairie way, by not saying more than the hour could hold. The Reverend pocketed his short verse and walked back toward town, humming. Virgil studied the fence line like it owed him money, and then asked, "What's the plan, Hannah?" "Fewer head, better stock," she said. "I'll cull hard and keep what minds the wind, put up more hay against years when the river sulks. Teach school come winter in the church hall for cash money and cents." Virgil's mouth twitched. "Kids'll learn their letters quick if you grade 'em like you grade cows." "Asa?" Hannah asked without looking at him. "I'll be a working partner," he said. "Not the boss. Pull posts, mend tack, ride line in weather other men call foolish. We'll sell a small string, honest and high. I'll keep my name off anything that don't need it and put my back on all of it." Virgil nodded slow, like a man testing a stirrup he meant to trust. "That'll go." He tipped his hat and drifted off to see about a hinge that had squeaked at him all winter. They walked the yard together and made a list. Without paper, roof seam, north fence, the pump that now breathed easy but wanted watching. He lifted the coop corner and set a stone under it so thaw wouldn't rot it from the ground up. She measured off a square near the porch for a kitchen plot that could catch sun early and hold it late. No speeches, just work. When Maud came by near noon, she clucked at the papers until the ink nearly blushed, then fished a sprig of wild mint from her apron and pinned it up in Hannah's hair with 2 quick jabs. "For luck," she said, "and because smell gets there before memory does. Come summer, this scent'll fill your yard." Hannah caught Asa looking at the mint like it was something holy. "One truth," she said, "because the day still needed it due." He wiped his hands on his trousers and didn't pretend to think. "I'm happy, and it scares me." "Mine," she said. "I'm tired, and it feels good." They stood by the apple stake a last moment. Snow glittered. The air had that tight drumhead sound you only get when cold and sun agree to split the day even. The deed lay safe in the Reverend's inner pocket on its way to file, and the drawer held a watch that would keep time for a kitchen now, not a kingdom. The wind shifted a thumb's width and put the mint smell in both their mouths. "Come summer," Maud had said. "Come summer," Hannah whispered, and let the words be a promise a season could hear. Summer stepped onto the Powder River flats like it owned the light. Grass went thigh-high and leaned when the south wind breathed, a long-legged horse easing into a lope. The saplings by the apple stake had taken to their work. New leaves slick as coins, little spurs where someday fruit would hang. Folks began to arrive long before noon, wagons shouldered with quilts and pie tins. children peeling off like quail to run the hill. Virgil and a brace of boys had thrown up an arch out of old fence rails, the knots showing like stars in daylight. Maud wired up wildflowers and a twist of mint that freshened the whole rise every time the wind swung the right way. Ephraim Nash carried a pot big enough to drown a calf in and claimed it was beans. He winked when steam proved him right. Deputy Tully sat his bay off to one side and pretended to be merely dust with a badge, while the Reverend Josiah Bell came on foot with his book in his pocket and a look that said he meant to keep the business short and square. Hannah wore good blue, not silk, just wool pressed smooth under an iron that knew its job, and pinned her hair back with Maud's hand. Asa put on a clean shirt that had met a needle, not a tailor, and left his pocket watch where he'd set it weeks ago, in the kitchen drawer with twine and string, power folded among useful things. The silver ring sat on his right hand still, bright from soap and work. They stood under the rails with the whole county politely not eavesdropping. The Reverend rested his palm on wood that had once kept cattle honest and said a single verse, then cleared his throat. "No frills," he reminded himself, and smiled like a man pleased to obey. Hannah and Asa looked at each other straight on. No speech, they'd done their talking in weather. She said it first, voice steady and plain. "Hold by truth," he answered without searching for cleverness. "Prove by work." It was enough. The Reverend lifted a hand. "Done," he said, and if he said more, the wind stole it and gave it back, as applause moving through the grass. Somebody struck a fiddle. Kids chased each other around the young apple trees, shrieking like hawks that had fallen in love with their echo. Maud unveiled the apple pies, crust crimped like good stitchery, and told the story of Hannah's mother's recipe book to a knot of women who nodded at the parts where butter mattered. Ephraim's beans drew men as surely as talk of weather. The pot went lighter by the minute. Even the hens strutted close, as if willing to be sociable now that nobody meant to cook them by accident. Asa took plates, not handshakes, and made himself useful. He hauled water, split a few sticks for the cook fires with the grain, reset a loose step, patched a saddle strap where a boy's weight had found the rot. Hannah moved through it all with chalk-dust hands. She'd been teaching letters in the church hall on Thursdays, and still had the habit of tapping a forefinger when a child's attention wandered. The two of them met at the table edge now and then to trade a bite and a word that wasn't needed, and say it anyway. "One truth," she reminded him when the noise dipped and a little quiet found them. He leaned in just enough. "I thought I'd be nervous," he said. "Turns out I'm calm. Must be the fence rails." "My turn," she said. "I didn't know happiness wore work clothes." They smiled, and it made a shape between them as solid as a post set deep. Toward afternoon, the hill went soft with shade. Virgil produced a jug that might have been lemonade if a person were willing to argue it, and Tully allowed as how the law had no opinion on citrus. The Reverend told a story about a wedding he'd botched once, and how the couple had lasted anyway, proof that grace could find its way around a clumsy man. Laughter loosened what worry was left in the day and rolled it downhill. When the light slowed, Asa and Hannah took a walk along the new seam where their fences met, no crowd in it now, just the two of them and the earth, trying on evening. They named what needed doing without writing it down, a north line that wanted tightening, a pump that should be checked before frost came back with its old ideas, a haystack to lay up fat so winter had to argue for every mouthful. He talked of breeding for cents as much as weight. She talked of school, how Ruthie Miller's R slouched like a tired cow, and how little Ben Crowley counted by twos, as if numbers were rabbits and he'd startled them into pairs. "Tomorrow," he said. "Tomorrow," she agreed. That word had scared them once. It didn't now. Back up the rise, the last of the pies thinned to crumbs, and somebody threw a quilt over the arch, so it became a shade house for toddlers who ran until they fell asleep under it. Maud fussed at her pans, which meant she was content. Ephraim packed his pot like a man who'd been fed as fair as he'd fed. Tully tipped his brim and rode off to be seen by nobody on a road that required it. The Reverend pocketed his short verse again, having found it enough twice in one day. Evening laid a hand on the grass and smoothed it. The south wind went long and easy, setting the prairie to one wide lean, the way a good mount settles into its gait when there's country to cover and daylight to spare. Hannah and Asa stood a minute more where the apple stake threw a skinny shadow, then turned toward the house that smelled of smoke and soap and something sweet cooling by the window. Inside, the kitchen drawer shut on the watch with a little wooden sigh. On the peg by the door hung her apron and his hat, neighbors already. He reached for the kettle, she reached for the cups. Small tasks found their hands the way water finds its bed. Outside the arch creaked once in the evening cool, then held. "Truth for today," he said, setting the kettle. "I like this quiet." "Truth for today," she said, laying forks by habit. "Me too." They ate what was left without ceremony, saved back a slice of pie for breakfast on principle, and looked in on Daisy, who had opinions about weddings and said none of them out loud. Lights went out in ones and twos across the flats. The creek talked to us, to itself, not needing an answer. Forgiveness had come the way spring does out here, not with a parade, but with thaw working up from underneath until one morning a person steps and the ground holds. They banked the fire. He hooked the door with his boot and let it ease shut. The prairie breathed. Somewhere a coyote told a joke only coyotes laugh at. Hannah leaned her shoulder to his in the doorway and felt him lean back the exact same. Not flashy, but it'll go all day. When the south wind finally laid the grass, Hannah and Asa kept to small work, mending tack, setting posts, telling one truth before sleep. That's how winter leaves a life out here, not with a trumpet, but with thaw underfoot. If this story sat right with you, drop a quick comment. 0 if the rule one truth a day hit home, 1 if the apple stake signing was your moment, and if you want more quiet Western tales that warm like stove heat after chores, subscribe and ride with us for the next trail.